Hello everyone, it's Lucas Mackintosh here, back again with another edition of my Retro Game Room, a place where I take a look at games that are deemed good, bad, average or largely unplayable and see if they have been unfairly labelled and if they are really that terrible. I figured since I'm in a shoot 'em up kind of mood, I thought I would review Duke Nukem Time to Kill for the PlayStation 1. Now my history with Duke Nukem is incredibly brief. I played the first one on the Nintendo 64, which was Duke Nukem 3D, and this was in the style of a first person shooter. To be honest, it had come out during a time where there were just so many games in the FPS genre. Having played GoldenEye, Turok and Doom already, I just couldn't click with Duke, and I'm sure the game is good, but for some reason it just didn't sustain my attention. Still, a year later I was reading a PlayStation 1 magazine and saw a review for Duke Nukem Time to Kill, and having seen screenshots of Duke in a third person perspective running around, it kind of reminded me a lot of Tomb Raider. Again, because I played a lot of Tomb Raider, particularly 1, 2 and 3, my gut instinct told me that it was just an attempt to cash in on Lara Croft's success. I did however buy this game off eBay many years ago and it's been sitting on my shelf ever since, but I've always been curious about it. Reviews of this game range from above average to good and many people really like this game. Okay, so let's get on with this shoot 'em up episode special. Go! 1999 saw Duke Nukem Time to Kill released in February for the PlayStation 1 in Europe and in September a year earlier in North America. It was developed by N-Space, who had acquired the rights from 3D Realms to use the Duke Nukem license and had previously made Duke Nukem Land of the Babes, which received many bad reviews at the time. So this was N-Space's second stab at trying to bring Duke into the then current and next wave of third-person platform heroes such as Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, Medieval's Sir Dan Fortescue, Banjo-Kazooie on the N64 and soon-to-be Ocarina of Time, which was released in Christmas of 1998. Core Design's Tomb Raider series on the PlayStation 1 had sold extremely well with their innovative gameplay and level design, and had really made Lara Croft a household name. It was felt that this gameplay style had worked for Lara, and although it didn't quite work out for Duke in Land of the Babes, N-Space persisted and decided to try again with a tough-talking macho man. Could they create a game that would not only have the feel of a Tomb Raider game, but would also play to Duke's strengths, such as including the trademark violence and humour the previous games had been known for? Well, Duke Nukem's Time to Kill sees Duke going back to what he does best, and that's killing alien scum, this time in the third person. The aliens have returned and are seriously screwing up the timeline after building a time portal. In order to put events back to how they were, he must travel through time to not only eradicate the many stages of the alien menace, but to also solve puzzles, find babes, guns and put a stop to their crazy scheme. Gameplay. Duke Nukem Time to Kill is a third-person action shoot-em-up puzzle game where players step into the shoes of Duke Nukem, a stereotypical action hero who must save Los Angeles once again from aliens and pigs who have shown up to try and invade Earth with the sole intention of becoming the dominant species, hoping to eliminate all humans, especially Duke, who has thwarted their plans in the past. This time they have managed to build a time portal which is activated by inputting 3 crystals into each part of it, thus allowing them to travel back and forth in time. The aliens use this new technology to go back to important time periods in history in order to change the present so that they can slowly take over Earth. Already they have taken over the Old West, the Middle Ages and Rome, as these are felt by the extraterrestrials to be the most important key moments in human history. The aliens have not only invaded these eras but have also left a massive army of pigs and mutants who have killed everyone, leaving only the women alive. Now, because of their meddling, the Los Angeles timeline is constantly being altered, with changes being made to the architecture and population, which will soon become a hybrid of pigs and humans. Duke finds this out the hard way when he decides to head down to his local strip club, the Bootylicious, and finds his old adversaries have taken over the club and the town. With his bike being transformed into a pink tricycle, Duke suddenly realises that time is being altered, and once again decides to make a stand and put a stop to the aliens once and for all. The developers N-Space clearly took a lot of inspiration from Tomb Raider, as Duke is played in the third person perspective, much like Lara Croft is. Duke must shoot enemies, run and jump through levels, solve puzzles which usually involve collecting keys, crystals or important historical items, and navigate his way through present day Los Angeles, the Old West, the Middle Ages and ancient Rome, eliminating the alien menace to ensure that the timeline goes back to how it was permanently. so Duke will typically start each level with only a few areas in the game available at a time. The goal is to acquire guns and ammo by killing aliens, pigs and mutants who inhabit each level in various locations. As the level is played, often Duke may come up against a barrier such as a locked door which requires a key or an access card, and must try and find the required item or items to get further through the level. One of the things that really confused me when I first played this game were the many doors scattered about the levels. Most of them were locked and couldn't be accessed at that time without some sort of key or device. The other doors were simply closed, and I didn't realise that for many of them Duke can just use his big boot move from the list of weapons he has and kick them down. Part of the confusion came from the fact that I thought the developers may have followed the Tomb Raider formula literally, whereby you need a key for pretty much every area or door in those games. However, once I learnt to use the boot, this game really opened up for me. Speaking of which, one thing this game has is tons and tons of guns and ammunition pretty much everywhere throughout the game, so Duke is constantly rewarded, especially when he finds secret areas, so it's almost impossible to completely run out of ammo. These hidden areas really help break down some of the tasks on each level and not only contain goodies, but may even give you a shortcut to other key areas in the level you may need to get to. All of Duke's signature weapons are here, from the surprisingly useful default Desert Eagle pistol to shotguns, flamethrowers, energy weapons, and even one which freezes enemies before shattering them into little pieces. So unlike most games where you have to watch and conserve your ammo, you have pretty much free reign to take it to the alien scum using whatever method you have. Duke even gets his mitts on pipe bombs and dynamite at his disposal, and these make blowing open secret entrances and rapidly destroying enemies a literal blast. Our hero will also have to collect med packs to restore and sustain his health, and atomic health icons which boost his energy count considerably. Another smart move N-Space implemented was the inclusion of armour that some aliens drop after Duke has sent them to meet their maker. After grabbing this handy little vest, our wisecracking hero can take a little more damage as he shoots his way through the never-ending wave of nasties. Not only is taking down enemies fun, but Duke will utter several lines of dialogue at times, which is extremely entertaining and never gets old, even though he may say the same things during a stage. In between the levels, developers N-Space have thrown in some bonus levels. These are mini missions where Duke must destroy all the enemies and get to the portal at the end before time runs out. He can also pick up some goodies as well. These missions are okay for the most part, but just feel like a rehash of what I was already doing. Also, once Duke has completed several levels within a section of the game, he must face a boss character, and it's a fight to the finish as a large red bar of energy appears on the screen, letting you know how much health the boss has. So Duke must somehow have a shootout and deplete the bar until the boss has no more energy in order to take it down and to move on to the next set of challenges. This game style is kind of confusing for me. On one hand, it wants to be this run and gun kill everything type of game, which is where the strength of the game lies, and this is no bad thing. But on the other, it also wants you to creep around and try and take out baddies from a distance. The problem with this method is that often shots are fired at Duke from a distance, and it can be hard to see who is firing at him and from where, so I would try and use caution wherever possible. This just meant that I would get repeatedly blindsided by enemies I couldn't always see, and trying to react to their attacks was difficult because it would rinse my health before I could even see them, as they would go out of shot or walk around a corner. One set of enemies I really hated were the Necrobrains. I encountered these firstly in the Old West levels underwater, and they need to be shot or avoided as their balls of energy can catch you unawares. I was also not happy to find that they were in the sheriff's office locked up in prison cells. Because the cells were at the side, I didn't know they were there and would mostly end up taking cheap hits before realising what was going on. As mentioned, Duke must use his wits to find certain items and solve puzzles to aid his progression within a stage. As the game focuses on time travel, the first level in Los Angeles has Duke trying to find 3 different coloured crystals which will activate the alien's time portal and allow him to travel back to the Old West. The puzzles in this game are not all that taxing and mostly involve Duke turning a valve on or off, pushing an important switch in a locked room, finding a key or key card, or locating those damn time crystals. When Duke returns from the Old West to LA, he finds that the layout has been changed and he must once again search for the 3 crystals to go back to another time period. I found this to be extremely annoying, especially since one crystal is hidden in a place no one would ever think of looking. So I was running around the whole level for what seemed like hours, thinking I'd missed something. It turns out the crystal was behind a green dumpster near the end. Now, who in their right mind would ever think about looking there? Is there really any need for this game to be cryptic? I mean, I know maybe the developers were trying to be clever, but having to go online to figure out where this crystal was didn't exactly give me that eureka moment. Add to that there's also the fact that you must use one of the crystals to open a metal door, as well as use it to help power the time portal. Why not just have Duke have to find a separate keycard or key to open this? So it's safe to say these initial early stages will really test your patience as a gamer. Also, I don't want to come across as a whiner, but why is Duke searching for these crystals again? I had already collected them in stage 1. Wouldn't it just make more sense for Duke to just find his way back to the time portal and then just warp out that way? One thing that would have been a cool addition was that instead of going back to LA, why not take a leaf out of Turtles in Time for the SNES and have Duke instantly warp to a new time period once he has completed one? It would keep things running pretty quickly, I should think. As cool as LA is though, it can become quite boring having to keep going back to complete the stage again because the pigs are constantly messing with time in the other time periods. However, despite the monotony of having to keep coming back, there was one thing that really made me laugh. Later on in the game, after returning to LA, Duke finds his favourite strip club. The Bootylicious has done away with the babes and now features pole dancing men and has been renamed Danglers. Duke Nukem uses a continue system when Duke runs out of health, allowing him to respawn on the last checkpoint he made it to. This means that he can retrace his steps and try and make it past the last point where he bit the bullet. Once all continues have been used, then your game is over and the player must load up the level again if the game was saved and must start again from the beginning of that stage. This is another annoying issue I had with the game. It throws way too much at Duke even on the lowest difficulty setting, so playing the game with limited continues was not really fun. Now I'll readily admit that I'm not the world's best games player, but the game just throws again so much at him, and getting by with just a handful of continues is almost impossible. Add to that the level's unfair and cruel stage hazards, multiple enemies, and just damn right overwhelming nature means that you need to take your time and plan what you're going to do, which is just fine, but you often have to change strategy because you are almost always under constant attack. The levels themselves mostly just kind of feel unstructured with a lot of opportunity for cheap deaths, because N-Space have just gone way overboard with lava and lava pits with an attempt to try and be like the first Tomb Raider, I think. But in these early PS1 games, at least the challenges were fair and achievable. In Time to Kill, if I saw a handful of square columns over lava, I would avoid it like the plague, unless I literally had to go there to push a switch or collect an important item. Let's take the second level of the Old West as an example of how unfair this game can be. Duke starts this level with a massive door he needs to get through. The door has these gun symbols on, indicating that he needs to go through the stage and shut each one down. As this is achieved, the door lights change, meaning that after the last one is found, it will eventually open the door. One of these guns is smack bang across the lava pit here, and again it's not the fact that it's constantly firing at me, it's Duke's abysmal and clunky jumping that prevents me from reaching the other side to push the switch to shut it down. Often Duke would get caught on a glitch, not make the jump, or when I did get to the other side, you have to be positioned exactly in the centre of the switch to be able to press it to shut it down. If Duke is a little bit too left or right, he won't push it and will get cut to ribbons by the gun blasts. Puzzles like this are just way too cruel and feel out of place. I did however enjoy using the jetpack, and it did make traversing areas I'd already been too much easier. The developers once again loved lava so much that they decided that in the Roman levels to devote a whole section to it, where Duke must jetpack across a huge river of the hot lethal magma and try and find 3 switches to open this door. Now, why does it have to be 3 switches? 2 would have been more than enough, as finding all 3 can be a real chore. I mean, look, the door clearly has 2 large bolts in it, so I don't know why you have to have a 3rd switch. Couldn't the door just open after you've got the 2 bolts? However, you must jet very carefully, as these switches can be very hard to find. Also, the pack naturally uses fuel, so you need to be sure about where you're going, as if he runs out mid-air then Duke will fall to his death. I just don't think the game equips him with enough continues to get through this whole game, which can lead to a lot of deaths and just intense frustration. One thing that alleviates this pain a little is that you can input a few cheeky codes, which gives Duke 99 continues, infinite ammo and all weapons and keys. In order to get this review done, I had to use the continues code and the weapons cheat later on, as it just wouldn't have been possible to see everything in this game, and I wanted to review the game in full and not just unfairly criticise it because of some of the problems I had encountered. This game could also have used a little bit more explanation as to what exactly Duke needs to do. In one of the medieval stages, Duke is instructed that he must find the family jewels and that there were 3 of them, so I worked really hard and was able to find them, but the game didn't really instruct me on what I was supposed to do with them. It turns out I had to place them on these circular panels atomic symbols. I mean, how was I supposed to know to do this? There's lots of these in the game and most of the time they're just part of the scenery and don't do anything. I did see it but didn't know I had to place the jewels on them to progress further. However, if you can get through this game and make it to the last level, things get even more confusing, as Duke appears in a room full of multiple portals and must go through each one eliminating baddies and finding the portal's exits. There are no puzzles to solve here, and it's just a case of being able to go through each section before the game allows you to face Moloch the Gatekeeper. These levels basically consist of Duke actively having to touch each of these portals in order to form some sort of sequence which allows you to finally face Moloch the Gatekeeper, who is the final boss on the game. Now, when you get to Moloch, he's surrounded by different warp points which take you to a different part of the boss room. Luckily, in order to get this review done on time, I had the 99 continues cheat, all weapons and infinite ammo, and as I said, this game would be next to impossible to complete without using these methods, so I took the liberty of blowing Moloch a new hole and ended the alien's persistent meddling with time. You do have to be careful on this level because you can accidentally step on a portal when you don't mean to, and sometimes this will warp you in front of Moloch or very far away. Either way, Moloch is very vicious, so I do recommend trying to just take him out quickly as much as you can. Once Moloch is dead, Duke returns to LA where he finds things are back to normal and he drives away on his bike. You then get a credit sequence with some of Duke's one-liners, which I have to say is very, very entertaining.
Well, that was fun.
Graphics for this game. The opening FMV is simply mind-blowing, with a pumping track from a band called Stabbing Westwood accompanying the story, showing the pigs and aliens in downtown LA taking over Duke's favourite strip club, the Bootylicious. I especially liked how, due to the pigs meddling with the past, it changes events in the future, turning Duke's badass chopper into a pink little tricycle with tassels. The levels are extremely colourful and detailed, with downtown LA looking abandoned and apocalyptic due to the alien invasion. The developers also worked hard on each time period, as there are many buildings and items which fit each one to a T and felt historically accurate. I also loved the pig statues in Rome, letting you know that they came, they saw, they conquered, and that it's up to Duke to change things. With some of the many puzzles Duke has to solve, it can be sometimes hard to tell what's a switch and what's a part of the scenery. I also struggled to see where I needed to place certain keys, as they didn't really stand out to me, meaning I would rush past them many times. As for the keys themselves, the developers didn't even bother animating them, so they kind of looked like strands, and I was never sure what I'd just picked up until I looked in Duke's menu. Duke looks like he should, and the shooting animations are all quite smooth, and to fit the period he is in, Duke also gets a change of clothes. It's a lot of fun running around in Rome with Duke wearing a toga, or in the Old West when he's dressed like a cowboy complete with hat and duds. Speaking of getting dressed up, it's not only Duke that gets a change of clothes, as the pigs also dress to match the time period that they are in. It's this level of detail that I applaud N-Space for, as they could have just not bothered and had the pigs in their police outfits, but it really gives the whole story realism that the aliens and pigs want to dominate each period and dress like they belong there. Another thing that really stood out to me were the explosions caused by any kind of explosive device Duke could get his hands on. This game allows the alien kicking machine to use pipe bombs, which can be blasted by Duke himself, dynamite, which creates one hell of an explosion, and even holy hand grenades. Not only do the effects all look cool, but they are extremely useful for taking out clusters of baddies if the Dukes was badly outnumbered. In-game story and cutscenes. To be honest, all you get is the opening to the game and the instruction manual that tell you what the story is. There are no cutscenes in the game at all, and this is a real shame. I would have liked to have seen Duke maybe eavesdropping on some aliens or pigs in one of the labs, or arriving at a time period from the portal, or at least see him swim or shoot some underwater baddies in another FMV before jetting off in some cool scenes. There's 1,000,001 things that N-Space could have implemented here, and it would have added greatly to the game and made it a lot more entertaining. I suppose you do get the mission objectives, which kind of give you a brief synopsis of what's going on, but it would have been nice to see it in the form of an FMV. Even the ending is kind of a letdown, which I felt could have been 1,000,000 times better. Just seeing Duke go back to what he likes doing without really missing a beat, I mean, this storyline about time travel is extremely epic, and I was hoping for something more. After all, Duke has gone back in time and corrected the timeline and saved civilization, but it is given very little fanfare. I know that this is generally the style of Duke Nukem games, but if this was trying to be more like Tomb Raider, there are so many elements from that game that N-Space could have borrowed. I often wonder whether it was an intentional decision not to do this by them, or whether they felt they could make a game that was just like one of Lara Croft's adventures and it would still be as good. Perhaps they felt that the story needed no explanation, I don't know. Music and sound effects. The music for the LA stages is probably my favourite and uses minimal electronic music, very reminiscent of 80s action films. It adds a depth of urgency and drama and sounds a little like the score from Escape from New York and even The Terminator at times. This was a good move in my opinion, as Duke is your general stereotypical action guy, and it's a good accompaniment and matches the gameplay perfectly, with Duke blasting his way through pigs, aliens and other nasties.
Yippee-ki-yay.
All three time periods Duke visits all have their own music, with the Wild West having much more of a slow, laid-back theme, which to me doesn't match the pace of the game or the action. I know that the game is trying to mirror the feel of some of the very classic westerns, and it certainly does graphically, but don't get me wrong, it's a fine piece of music, but I just feel that perhaps a faster, more intense piece would be more suitable. The medieval theme to me is a fantastic piece of music. It's not only suspenseful, but it leaves you wondering what's around the corner. It also comes across as muddled up and doesn't quite know how to resolve itself, which I think is fantastic actually, because Duke's timeline has been messed up and so things are not the same. It's perfectly suited here. The music in Rome is very regal and grand, with booming trumpets and military style drums. I can definitely tell that a lot of work clearly went into this one, and as I listen to it I can imagine some historical Roman figures being announced with this theme, such as Julius Caesar or the Roman Empire about to prepare for battle. It stood out for me and sounded like a film score, much like the Los Angeles music. It would have been nice if there were a few more tracks in this game, as there's only a handful, but any music is better than none at all. The game's sound effects match the relentless action of Duke, and every gun featured in the game has their own distinct sound, from the pistol to the Gatling gun. It's also really easy to tell what weapons are being used against him. Despite the game's enemies often getting an unfair advantage on our rugged time traveller, you can often hear distant sounds of pigs and aliens squealing, letting you know that enemies are nearby. I really enjoyed the different sounds the babes would make in each era whenever Duke interacts with them, particularly in the first stage when one of them is holding a riding crop and prompts him to turn out the lights.
Turn out the lights and I'll show you the meaning of pain.
I really enjoyed the sounds when Duke would execute a wave of enemies, and it perfectly complements the graphical animations really well. Despite my problems with this game, it doesn't suffer in the sound department at all. Controls. The controls are very similar to Tomb Raider's, with Duke being able to jump and leap this time. However, unlike Miss Croft, he can't jump as high, and although jumping and grabbing works quite well in those games, in this game it doesn't particularly always work out well for Duke, and you have to be a little bit more careful in this game. You always have the option of mapping the controls to your needs if you are finding the standard configuration a little confusing. The directional pad moves Duke around, whilst all the buttons all make Duke perform certain actions, with square being the one that allows him to jump, fire up his jetpack if he is collecting it in his inventory, and swim. The circle button takes out and puts his current weapon away. X fires his weapon when it is taken out and is also used as the action button to climb up, grab, press buttons, etc. and to also boot down the game's doors. Whilst triangle allows him to quickly turn or crouch. I'll be honest though, I never really used the triangle button throughout this game. L1 makes Duke walk, L2 strafes him left, R1 allows you to look around and target enemies, and R2 will strafe him right. Pushing select allows you to see a list of all of Duke's weapons and items, and you can select which ones you want using the directional buttons. Pressing start pauses the game and brings up a list of the level's objectives. There are many times in this game where our foul-mouthed protagonist must leap over tricky gaps, and often when a running leap is required, Duke must do a run up. I found that at times, when there was not enough space to run and leap, I would have to go a little bit far back as I could, and then try running and jumping. However, the jump button wouldn't always respond, and there were many times where I fell into lava or down deep pits because of this, so extra care must be taken. These actions also feel heavy and clunky. I know that Duke isn't the most agile guy, and most of the time I fell, I do admit it was probably player error, but they could have made him a little lighter on his feet and have him jump a little higher. Whilst the intent was there to try and be like Tomb Raider, ultimately it's a mixed affair, because in those early PlayStation 1 games, developers' core design worked out the levels were designed in squares, so the player could at least work out how to make a jump. This simply doesn't work in Time to Kill because the levels are just too large and expansive, and they don't seem really designed with Duke's controls or skills in mind. I did try to adapt to the game, but it is so many times where you have to again leap across lava or invite you to take a risk to jump to ledges to get health or other ammo, but half the time I would fall or die, and this would happen when I was walking around high up, as Duke's walking is just so sensitive, and I would fall to my death, and this was so frustrating. I did however find the shooting to be quite serviceable at times, and enjoyed blasting my way through waves of pigs, aliens and necro brains. Pressing select brings up a list of weapons Duke has, and you can select which one you would like to use. The auto aim for the most part works okay when enemies are in close quarters or nearby, but for whatever reason it won't always lock onto your target. Now this is fine with the Hellwing enemies, as the fight patterns are meant to be unpredictable, so in real life trying to lock onto them would be difficult. However, occasionally the game would let you target them, but most of the time it's better to aim and shoot yourself for accuracy. Also, trying to move Duke through doorways into other rooms can be difficult, as he often gets caught on corners and has to be positioned almost exactly centered to get through. The game's controls are by no means terrible, but may take players a bit of time to get used to. Once you get past the fact that Duke himself is no Lara, it is possible to adjust to the game's dodgy control style, but having to climb or run and then jump can be a real struggle when you realise again that the game just throws a load of pits and obstacles at Duke that most of the time he won't be able to realistically make due to his slowness and his very small jump action. Overall, Duke Nukem Time to Kill is certainly an interesting game. It's by no means terrible, and I'll admit that I generally had a good time with some of it, but I did feel that many levels were again uneven and sometimes very mixed and confusing, and it's difficult to kind of know what to expect. One example of this is in one of the medieval levels where I was collecting jewels. I was on the next level thinking it would be more of the same, but I just discovered that it was actually easier than the level I'd done previous. I just don't understand why they didn't take the LA levels, and feel that perhaps some of them could have followed that template, as they kind of had a logical progression on those stages. In the time periods it can be really hard to know where to go or what to do. Also towards the latter half of the game it gets very unfair very quickly, and I mentioned even on the easiest setting I was struggling a lot. It's not so much the enemies but again the controls, and trying to get Duke to simply jump can be a difficult task. I'm all for challenging a video game, but when the game's controls just don't match the many obstacles you have to get, then it becomes an overwhelming affair for me. I know that there are die-hard fans of this game, but I wouldn't say it's up there as one of the best PlayStation 1 games of all time. However, there are moments where this game really shines. Duke blasting baddies is a lot of fun, and there's a plethora of guns and ammunition to harvest as you work your way through time. You are rewarded pretty much every step of the way in this game, and I never felt as though the game was stingy on weapons. After all, this is one of Duke Nukem's strengths. That and his one-liners which crack me up every time. This game is meant to be a Tomb Raider piss take, which I understand, but Duke's jumping is no laughing matter, and again a higher jump would have eased some of the frustrations I felt with Time to Kill. Again, this game is gorgeous and is certainly one of the better looking PS1 games that came out at the time. It works well when it does what Duke does best. As I just said, the humour and shooting elements are just first rate. The bosses however feel a little tacked on, and even after vanquishing the last one you don't really get much of an ending. I did enjoy the time periods and the outfits that Duke would wear, and seeing pigs in their underwear was really funny. If you're a fan of Duke Nukem then I would recommend it, but for anyone expecting a Duke Nukem Tomb Raider full-on experience I would probably look elsewhere. Still, although it tries to be Tomb Raider, it's clear that N-Space worked hard on making each level visually appealing and different. Final rating, 3.3 out of 5. Not the best PlayStation 1 Tomb Raider clone, but certainly not the worst. Enjoyable in parts, but suffers occasionally from poor jumping, sometimes confusing level design and constant unfair stage hazards. However, the game looks very visually appealing and blasting aliens is a lot of fun in this third person style, and there's tons of humour to at least make you chuckle throughout your time with this game. Okay, so thank you very much. It's been Lucas Mackintosh with another Lucas Mackintosh Retro Game Room review. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch my review. Please don't forget to comment, like and subscribe to support the channel. Keep checking back for new retro content, and please don't forget to give me some feedback as well and let me know what classic games you'd like to see me review in my game room. If I can review it, I will certainly try. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time for another retro video game review.